Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order here. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our December quarterly ITSB meeting. Just a note that our meeting is being recorded, and so you all probably have seen that little reminder up there in the Teams site. So first, we do have a new board member, so we want to make sure that we get that information out to everybody. So please let me introduce Patrick Fleming, who's the CIO for the North Carolina Community College System, and he's a delegate of President Stith. So Patrick, welcome to our group. I don't know if you have any words of wisdom you want to say.
Well,
put you on the spot and embarrass you.
No, that's okay. For those of y'all that know me, that's not a problem at all. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the introduction. It's fantastic to be on this team. And to give a little shout out to the North Carolina Community College System, I think with the recent budget, we are looking very strong headed into 2022. And I can't say enough about the services the 58 community colleges provide the state as we continue to focus on creating that sustainable economic development for North Carolina. And I'm really absolutely excited to join this team as well as continue to delivering high quality technology solutions for the 58. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for being part of this esteemed group here. So we appreciate your future support and work that's going to probably come your way to help us out. We're going to go ahead and move forward. And first and foremost, I just want to wish everybody a happy holidays as we're coming here to the end of December, and probably some much needed rest and recovery time frame before we hit the new year and running hard. We'll talk about the budget and some of those things a little bit later. But probably on a more somber note, I just want to make sure everybody in the ITSB is aware of the fact that we did have the unexpected passing of Susan Coward last month, much to our shock. And, you know, she was a phenomenal coworker to all of us. She was very instrumental in supporting the IT strategy board, among the many other things that she did. Has had a long and storied career here, not only in DIT, but also in her time frame when she was within DOT. And so she is being sorely missed. I hate to say she's going to be sorely missed. She is sorely missed. And I just wanted to make everyone aware of the fact that this coming Sunday at 3 p.m. at the Brown Wind Funeral Home, there will be a memorial service for Susan in her honor. And I just want to make sure that all of you at the ITSB were aware of that. And if you wanted to come and join us at her memorial service, you had that opportunity. So again, you know, I hate to be the deliverer of bad news, but, you know, we do miss Susan on a daily basis. But with that said, too, I also want to make sure that everyone's aware of the fact that, you know, work unfortunately does go on. And as a result of that, Sarah Porper, who's now joined us on the screen here, Sarah, I don't know if I can say you agreed to take it on and you were voluntold, but Sarah's going to assume the ITSB duties that were previously performed by Susan. And so just a little background here for Sarah and her role. Sarah, as of December 1, is now overseeing our strategy and governance development here in DIT. And with a focus really not only on just DIT, but our IT statewide strategy. So if you recall, the enterprise strategic plan, as well as the DIT strategic plan that were published earlier this year, were in large part due to Sarah's efforts and behind the scene work she did in collaborating across the various organizations that we all support. Many of you already have known Sarah through the ITSB, but also in her prior role with OSBM as well. So that's a very beneficial to us here to have her in this role. Especially as she understands some of the intricacies and nuances of our budgeting process here in the state of North Carolina, and has those working relationships already developed within OSBM. So I'm confident we're going to be in great hands with Sarah as we move forward here. So if you see Sarah reaching out, please understand that it's in the role of her and her support of the ITSB as we move forward. So thank you for that. On some other news, as of December 1, we implemented a reorganization here in DIT. I'm not going to get into all the specifics of the reorg with the ITSB, but the areas of noteworthiness that you all need to be aware of is we did reorg in the manner that really starts talking about strategy, governance, and enterprise architecture. And so with that in mind, Glenn I'm going to say GPOP, but Glenn Poplawski is heading up that division. And Glenn is, as part of that reorg, is now a direct report to Susan Kellogg, my chief deputy, who's going to help spearhead with her and Glenn are going to help spearhead the focused efforts that we have on governance, strategy, enterprise architecture, portfolio management, project management, program management, all those types of activities as we move forward. So again, I'm excited about that. That just went into effect on December 1st. We're starting to get some of the things aligned here very quickly. And again, we'll come back to why this is important and how I'm hoping that the ITSP can help us here in a little bit. On the, as we said about it, on the good news front, we have a state budget. And as part of that state budget is nearly $1 billion that's going to be coming here through DIT to help build digital equity and connect every household here in North Carolina with high-speed internet so we can fully get everyone participating in a modern economy. So Nate Denny, my deputy secretary that's overseeing broadband and digital equity, he's going to talk a little bit later here in our presentation and kind of go through the aspects of the budget and the various programs that were funded and prescribed by the state legislature as we look at how those dollars are being allocated out across those various programs, and then as well as what we're doing in the lines of literacy and enablement when we think about digital equity and conquering the digital divide that exists here in the state of North Carolina. I think it's also important for us to note that our colleagues in DPI and the community college system also got broadband funding. So we have this once-in-a-generational opportunity here to truly address the connectivity issues and the digital divide that exists in our state. We have to get this infrastructure in place. We have to get people connected, and we have to get them educated on how to use the internet so they don't become victimized by the nefarious actors that are out there. We all know, and I see Colonel Felicio is on here, and along with Rob Main, we have enough cyber activity going on that we are working through our local government partners and critical infrastructure partners. We don't need to continue to compound the problem by also not doing our due diligence to educate our residents of our state and our businesses of our state the importance of cybersecurity, because at the end of the day, cyber is everyone's responsibility, not just our main players here. Speaking of cyber, another area I'm really, really pleased about, and I can't overemphasize the really part, is we have reoccurring cyber funding for the first time in our budget's history. So the legislature and the governor were able to get us $7.5 million reoccurring cyber funding on an annual basis. So we're very excited about what that can do. As you know, a lot of great things got done here in North Carolina, but it was done with one-time funding sources. Not a way to sustain a program. And so with this reoccurring cyber funding, we're also looking at the development of a 3 to 5 year cyber strategic plan that Rob has been spearheading and working with some of our supplier partners here in the state. And that is something we're looking to present to the legislature. Again, reinforcing the need for this reoccurring funding, but also to talk about how we might be able to do some cybersecurity functions a little bit differently as we look at the state holistic picture, and especially in support of our local government partners. As you know, many of them across the state are in dire need of help with cyber. We have a few that are doing a really good job, and then we have a few that, yeah, it's just horrible. So we'll just leave it at that. Also within the budget, just for everyone's awareness, there's some key enterprise projects that got funded. First and foremost is NC FAST, the Child Welfare Services Infrastructure Modernization. So the replacement of the current system was funded. We have the DHHS Medicaid Enterprise System Program, which is a replacement for NC TRACS. We have our state controller's financial backbone replacement, which again is an ongoing replacement of NCAS. In DPI, we have the School Modernization Program, which is an ERP licensure reporting analytics system. As Patrick knows, as he's stepping in the role, we have this little project in the community college system that's doing ERP system replacement. And then likewise in the court system, the administrative office of the courts, we have the e-courts implementation that's underway or will be underway very shortly. Also, just for everyone's awareness, statutorily we're required to provide a written update to the legislature on the activities of the ITSB. So Sarah's going to be coordinating that activity, working with Lee Jackson, who's our legislative affairs lead here. And really what the point of this report is to talk about the status of those projects over the last year, and also looking at the 5-year prioritization plan. And this report goes to JLOC, the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee. And so we need to get that out the door. So we're going to go ahead and get that drafted. And the goal is to get that out the door here early part of January. And then as we look at some upcoming future work that I would like for the ITSB to perform is one of the goals of the ITSB when we look at our authorizing environment was to have the ITSB help recommend projects to the legislature. Now, I want to be respectful of the ITSB's role, but I also want to be respectful of the role that the governor has and our Council of State members have when we look at this kind of work. So what I'm looking hopefully to have the ITSB do is to take a look at criteria that we should be considering and the weighting of that criteria when we look at project prioritization. And we look at the validity of IT projects that are looking for funding. And I want to bring up a little chart here real quick if I can share. This is always dangerous when you come out and do something. Where is it? Here we go. Hopefully everybody can kind of see this very simplified diagram. But you know, here at the top, I mean, we all have customers. Customers in this case are our residents, is our businesses, is our tourists, it's our agencies. And all our customers have needs and pressures. And what we're trying to do here, and where I'm really asking Sarah to focus a lot of time on, is in this triangle here that's called governance. And that is, what are the processes that we go through to determine and make recommendations as to what projects have, I hate to say value, but as we look at the ranking of everything, we can't necessarily fund everything that comes forward from the agencies, and there needs to be some type of a prioritization process that we go through that looks at the constraints that we have. And if you look at the constraints here, you can see people. People is, I'll include our supplier community in the word people, but when we look at capacity and capability, we have a limitation on people. Our supplier community has limitations on people. We have the supply chain issues that are existing out there, and will probably continue through 2022 and into 2023. So this is a constraint that we're going to have to account for as we look at prioritization. We also have to look at our service catalog and what are the business areas that we're in and that we're supporting, and how does that align to our overall enterprise architecture. And then obviously we have the dollars discussion here as well. This is probably the first time that I can recall ever in my public sector career where I hate to say money was not an issue. We have the money. Now, the issue here, though, is the color of the money, right? So by that, I mean, not a dollar's not a dollar. A dollar can be from different things, through federal FFP cost sharing, through grants, through time-limited one-time funding sources. So the type of dollars, the type of money that we have is also a constraint, because we have sometimes some arbitrary deadlines in which we need to spend funds within. And that sometimes will drive decision-making processes as well. But when you look here, and as you look at coming out of governance and whether or not projects move forward, how we start doing program management, project management, how we're doing the health checks of our projects, how we make decisions as to whether or not we need to defer something as maybe something new comes in. Let's say we have a significant cyber attack as an example, and we have to go patch various applications. That may take away from people resources and dollars that have to get redirected to that effort. That's going to have an impact on some of these other initiatives that might already be in the pipeline. And so we may need to defer and have to go back through the governance process as to how that gets accounted for. We also need to look at the life cycle of our applications and the technologies to support them, and most importantly, start talking about risk. Not just technology risk, but risk to the business, and to make sure that our business leaders, our agency cabinet members, our agency heads, are aware of the business risk that's in their portfolio and have visibility and acknowledgement of that risk as we continue to move forward, because I think risk has got to be part of that prioritization effort. You know, it's similar to when you drive a new car off the lot, it becomes an old car. And so the day after we implement a new system, it becomes a legacy system, whether or not we want to actually think of it as legacy. But we have to also take a look at how do we do maintenance and operations? How do we operate and manage it? And what is that cost in sustaining that application over a 5-year period or longer, depending upon what the scope of the effort is? And how do you do that is really, we got to start getting down now to metrics and getting to those reports and visualizations, and ultimately to the value conversation. What is the value that it's bringing? Is the application still bringing the value that it was anticipated to our tourists, to our residents, to our businesses, and to our fellow agency members too, depending upon what the type of service it is? And of course, then at the bottom here, you can kind of see, you know, we all have guiding principles, we have policies we have to listen to, standards, regs, enterprise architecture, and then ultimately what we want to start seeing is some technology convergence. You know, the more individual components we have out there, the higher our cost, the greater our risk, and the more it's going to impact our ability with people, capacity, and capability. So we need to start narrowing that landscape a little bit to get to different outcomes here within our state. And so with that in mind, what I'm asking is that Sarah will get together and reach out to all of you later this month to try to see who would be interested in working with us on this, effort. Our intent here is to try for the short session to get some initial criteria established, some initial weighting of that criteria, and to run a few projects through that criteria, to use it as a prototype to see, are we getting the outcomes that we were hopeful for? What are the unintended consequences that are now coming out as a result of this? What refinement do we need to make to the process overall? And then the goal would be that hopefully when we get to the next long session for the next biennial budget submission, we would have this process in place to go ahead and do it as part of the budget submissions from the agencies. I've had a couple conversations, I shouldn't say Charlie and I have spoken about this with OSBM, and I know Sarah has been working with a lot of her colleagues over in OSBM and looking at how we could go about doing something like this. So again, the intent here would be not to have it in effect for the short session, but to at least get some initial seeding of criteria and the weighting of that criteria, move forward. Let's do run a couple projects through it, see what the outcomes are, and then refine and enhance it and get it ready for the long session and the next biennial budget submission. Again, part of that's also, we're not sure how many projects we're going to see in the short session, to be honest, as well. Seeing how we're all just now getting a budget, and we're going to probably be heads down on the ground, focused on the budget process and getting the current initiatives underway. So again, that's why we're not looking to doing this in the short session. Now, we do have a short fuse on this, unfortunately. OSBM has to get directions out on the budget in the very, very near future. And we need to move quickly. So we're going to be looking at the early January, trying to get a group together. And Sarah just slid me a note on the door and said, if anyone is interested in participating on this, please reach out to her directly, sarah.porper@nc.gov. And we want to get this underway and see what the outcomes are. I think that's everything for me for updates. So I will quit rambling and we'll get to some real fun stuff. But before we get to our committee reports and a discussion on broadband, does anybody have any questions? Okay, not hearing any. So the first committee report. Tracy, I'm supposed to hold up my North Carolina backdrop here for you, my UNC backdrop, but I will. You guys have been doing a great job there. So, and I guess I got no chance in heck of seeing Coach K at all in his final season with your outrageous ticket prices. So why don't we just go right ahead to digital transformation and give us an update of the great work you guys have been doing?
Fantastic. Thanks. I'll be fairly quick, I think, but happy to take any questions along with the team and the representatives who are here. As you will all recall from our last meeting of the full ITSB, we reported on what we describe, what we call a digital transformation roadmap. that the last time you saw it had the words draft on it. But since the meeting and given the reaction we heard from people around the room, we've gone ahead as our group and stamped it final and viewing it as now a completed effort. Since that time, we also, the couple of things I'll report on, we also had a further debrief with the Secretary and State CIO, Secretary Weaver, and spent a good amount of time on a call discussing what if, right, we work toward beyond the obvious work of tracking projects against that digital roadmap. And so what we talked about with Jim was his desire and hope that as a committee, the digital transformation team could continue to work. So he encouraged us to, I think my quote was, keep going. Originally, when the group was conceived, we anticipated that the body of our work in this first year might include the establishment of this roadmap, and then the sort of quarterly kind of check-in process that would be consistent with evaluating and ensuring that that roadmap continues to be one that is relevant to the state and is producing the right kind of effort and action within DIT. So we had thought as a committee that we would meet intensely for a couple of months, devise a roadmap, and then perhaps check in on a quarterly basis so that we could be responsive to this group, the larger ITSB, in providing our assessment of the resonance of the activities of the state with that roadmap. What Jim encouraged was for us to, quote, keep going, which his indication and our interpretation was that he thought we shouldn't just do that quarterly-ish check-in. And so what we've had a couple of meetings since, and what we did was identify first 3 prospective work areas that the digital transformation group might engage in. One was about identity management and personas. As you've seen, if you read through the roadmap, I'm sure you all did, the idea of consistent identity management is understood to be a foundational item for everything we need to do to combine the activities and support the activities of the state and the many agencies, not to mention the local municipalities. And so the notion of a digital management process and the idea of personas. I, as an individual, might simultaneously have the persona of a CEO and a business trying to start up in the region, as well as a parent to a student who goes to school in the region, as well as an individual who is interested in or filing for certain permits related to being a citizen. So the idea that we all have many personas and personalities that get reflected through the identity management process was one we thought was a weighty and worthwhile area for us to consider as work of the digital transformation group, because again, it enables everything in digital transformation. The second area we talked about was the idea of a digital transformation roadmap roadshow. The idea here being that without the proper grounding and appropriate understanding of where and how the digital transformation committee selected and promoted those ideas for the roadmap, other agencies, other individuals throughout the state, our legislatures might not have a full appreciation of the importance of that work and the careful balance we need to take between decreeing what needs to happen and engendering the trust and support and engagement of the many agencies and individuals who would make the digital transformation roadmap a success. So that was the second area of effort. The third area of effort I won't go into in detail was of potential effort was rural broadband. And the thought there was, even though we know that this is a much, much bigger effort at the state level, it is an effort that is, again, foundational to what we will need to do for digital transformation. We cannot successfully involve all of the population of the state in what digital transformation we are able to deliver unless there is the appropriate level of connectivity. And as you so eloquently heard in the opening remarks, the education and awareness of how that happens. So we recognize that rural broadband was a little outside the bounds of digital transformation per se as an activity, but again, a foundational effort, and we couldn't succeed without it. So those were the three areas that we put forward as possible areas of, in Jim's word, keep going. As a group, we then identified, and you can see here the highlighted one, that digital transformation roadmap roadshow was something we thought was important to do. We identified all these three areas as work areas that we thought would be not compulsory for every member, but more pursued by the interest and enthusiasm of individuals. So nearly everyone on the group is engaged in this effort at one level or another. And the idea would be with Keith Briggs, thank you very much, Keith, on point as our lead to sort of organize that activity and connect with not only Glenn, but also Sarah and others. We would hope to spend some time in the next couple of months devising a plan for a roadshow that doesn't conflict, doesn't contradict what the state already may be intending to do, what DIT may already need to do in terms of its work with agencies and municipalities, but could complement that work. And then we could engage and assist as identified as necessary and as the plans for that shake out. So that's the area of work that we expect to be pursuing over the coming couple of, probably 2 quarters. And so we have we've established a monthly meeting cadence, just to let folks know. The meeting we'll have next week will be, again, for those members who have the availability and enthusiasm and ability to engage in this first meeting. That would be to talk about the roadshow strategy and the citizen portal, giving an update because from Glenn, because that's fundamental to what we'll be doing as digital transformation. So next week, optional meeting for probably most of the members of our group, but not 100%, where we work out what that strategy might look like and how it complements the state's work. A second follow-on meeting then in January, again, in that optional category of work, where we finalize how we would approach that roadshow. We would also hope at that meeting to have a presentation about some of the digital identity aspects and an update from Glenn and others about the state's work on that front. And then in February, we would have what we would call our formal quarterly meeting, where we would do a check-in on the status of various efforts against the digital transformation roadmap that we talked to you about in September and that we finalized in, say, October, November. And so that would be the first of our aimed at quarterly check-ins and planning among our group for what we would then bring forward to this committee in March for the regular meeting of this board. So I just wanted to give you a brief on our project. I probably went on longer than I intended. And again, up at the top of this slide, you see the members of our group. We have Joe Abernathy and Keith Briggs, who are also members of the ITSB. And then we have 3 additional members of the Digital Transformation Committee who are not formally part of the ITSB, but attend our meetings as the occasion permits. And that's Keith Collins, Ann Hungate, and Tina Piccioni. So I wanted to stop there, invite other members of our group to comment, any of them, but particularly Keith Briggs, who's kind of going to shoulder the lead in this next set of activities, and take any questions from the group.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good presentation starting out, Tracy. Thank you. Just real brief on the roadshow piece. The strategy of the strategy was to leverage, foundational work already going on within the citizen portal. We've got a great team working on communication, marketing, branding, development of that citizen portal. They've done a lot of good legwork already. And so the philosophy there was, hey, if they've already started this and it is a kind of a supporting initiative from digital transformation, why not build upon that? So we did. We've had a couple of meetings. Actually, we just had a great meeting this week with DIT communication team. They've built a kind of a framework of approach to get communications marketing out about Citizen Portal, which we're going to share a little bit next week in our meeting. And then from that, we did talk a little bit about Roadshow, how we could encapsulate what they're doing with the Citizen Portal, but also how do we grow upon all the initiatives that are coming in the digital transformation area, and getting it out in front of people, making them understand or helping them understand, getting them bought in, getting the support, just to get things moving. So I'm really excited. And like I said, the meeting was fabulous, and we'll get this in front of the committee next week as part of that strategy, get feedback, and then really make preparations to move forward. I'm excited.
Thanks, Keith. Other comments either from the Digital Transformation Committee members or questions from the larger ITSB board group?
Yeah, Tracy, I have a question, and I know members of your committee had talked passionately about, don't forget about the business aspect to this as well. So while there's a lot of conversation right now focused on our residents and the Citizen Portal, just again, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of the fact that we are also keeping the business component in mind as well. And that's still in scope of what this overall effort is. It's not just focused on our residents, correct?
Absolutely. And, my subtle comment, perhaps too subtle, about, the persona that I might have as a small business owner. There are clearly also large businesses, right, who use our services and who would rely upon the innovation and work we do in digital transformation to make it easier and more accessible for them. So certainly those aspects of commerce and otherwise are going to be central to these activities.
And Keith, I just want to thank you again for taking the lead to spearhead the Roadshow. I think it's important that we have an agency helping in that dialogue. So it's not from an IT aspect, but it's also, you're bringing that business focus with it as well. So thank you very much for that. Anybody else on the ITSB questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Tracy, thank you. Thank you to your team for all the hard work, and look forward to upcoming updates here as you have indicated there. So thank you so much for your efforts. We'll now move on to Cybersecurity and Privacy Committee, and I don't believe Jeff's with us today. So Rob, are you taking this?
I'm here. Jim,
oh, you're here?
you
Okay, I'm sorry, Jeff. Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm in Champaign, Illinois this morning at the University of Illinois. We're looking at how we collaborate between biomedical engineers and physicians to develop our next generation of solutions in healthcare. So kind of fascinating discussions we've got going on. Just as FYI, and hopefully we'll be done, but I have a hard stop at 10:30 as we proceed through the rest of the board meeting. Picking up on what Tracy had mentioned about ease of access for our businesses and our residents into our system solutions and applications. Obviously, the cybersecurity team is focusing at a global level, looking at overall the cyber maturity and how we ensure cybersecurity and privacy of that data that they access amongst themselves and with state data as well. What we've been doing, we actually have a standing monthly meeting. So we've been meeting every month, and as you've seen some of the people on the header, Gerald Poplin, Keith, as well, Werner, Randy Kress, Lieutenant Colonel Robbie Felicio. As a group, we're kind of the standing members. And then we also have participation on a regular basis from a number of the DIT folks and people, CISOs, representing DOT and DHHS and DPS and the university system. That include Peretti Reddy. Al, I know, was on here. I saw earlier, Roethlisberger, Kim Smodik, Keith Laney. So a number of really subject matter experts that have been up to their eyeballs. And obviously, we are all led and facilitated by a tremendous brain trust and expert in cybersecurity with Rob Main. And it's such a treasure to have you leading this side of DIT now. We've been focused, just topically, what we've been doing through our meetings is first continuing to get updates on legislative efforts, getting budget updates, looking at initiatives, that impact particularly the cyberspace. We've been spending time on broadband, so there's some crossover, Tracy, with your guys on the digital transformation, because we know that is a great enabler as we go forward. But like you guys looking at specific topics, we've been focused on two primarily, spending a great deal of effort on, and that's how do we create educational pathways and opportunities to educate and also fill a workforce requirement around cybersecurity positions and expertise. And then secondarily, from a pragmatic perspective and delivery perspective, is to talk about the whole of state capability, to really be the catalyst and facilitators that we ensure that data security and privacy at the lowest levels and access points that we're protected. So obviously we're looking at, besides cross-state agencies, how we communicate and interact and access and protect interactions with counties and municipalities as well. What I'm going to ask to do is to share our work through that, is take a little bit of time, if we may, do two quick presentations, one by Keith Werner and Rob Main, which will talk about educational pathways, and then we'll follow it, if it's okay, with Randy Kress and Colonel Felicio to talk about where we are in our positions and development on whole of states. So if it's okay, Rob, I'm going to turn it to you and let you kind of direct traffic from here, if you don't mind.
Certainly. Good morning, Jeff, Tracy, Mr. Secretary, fellow ITSP board members. I want to start off with a quick number, 21,010. What does that represent? Well, we'll get down to that in the problem statement, so just table that for just one moment. This cybersecurity education pathways is an absolutely essential component to our whole of state efforts. If we don't have by which we can build talent, educate them, and then place them in public sector positions that perform a cybersecurity role, we are absolutely in a dire position. So the mission of this particular pathway effort, and on behalf of, I wanted to start by saying on behalf of Keith, I'm pleased to be able to present this information to you all. The mission of this cybersecurity education pathways endeavor is to identify, educate, develop, train, and employ folks that would be going into cybersecurity roles through either apprenticeships or internships with local government, state government, community college systems, and university systems. There's also an additional education pathway that we'll be discussing here shortly. The goal is to develop a comprehensive program in the creation of a sustainable cybersecurity human capital pipeline. So here comes that 21,010 number. Problem statement is defined as follows. Recruitment and retention of cybersecurity professionals, frankly, is challenging. And this is not unique to state government, but also local governments, community colleges, K through 12 school districts. Demand and competition is extremely high for the limited talent that's currently available. The 21,010 number represents the total number of vacant cyber positions in North Carolina. There are 7 different categories from our source of information for that number. We are in the next to bottom category in terms of the most dire need for cybersecurity professionals. That 21,010 number is a 19% increase over the value that it was at, 16,000 and change, just from 2 months ago. And with that, we developed a proposal, and that proposal can be seen below. Develop a multi-pronged pathway to increase the number of cybersecurity professionals in terms of quality, within of identifying public sector opportunities in North Carolina. There's a number of different things that build into this. Working with the state Office of State Human Resources to develop that pathway through apprenticeships, internships, and mentoring, and also create a Cyber Fellows program. And now for those of you attending this meeting who are familiar with the Teaching Fellows program, it follows a similar pathway or framework. A part of that proposal is also the development of curriculum and inventory existing certificate programs across the state in alignment with our centers of academic excellence, with one example being the Carolina Cyber Center at Montreat College. There are 13 total CAEs across North Carolina. We have to clearly articulate the inventory of jobs to the program and target our recruitment efforts at a variety of different categories. First of all, focusing in on our middle and high school students, but this would also include identifying transitioning military members who would want to stay in North Carolina. We have a ton of high quality veterans that are transitioning out of military service that would be an absolutely perfect fit for cyber positions, but there's no pathway to get to from where they're at to a public sector opportunity. Targeting community college students as well, and university students for our recruitment efforts. Another component of this proposal would be to identify job placements in state, local, and education systems. Working with our private sector partners to also identify opportunities there that would be targets for the pipeline, and also obviously funding support is absolutely essential. Developed a pathway graphic of sorts, and I want to walk you through this. And this is just using the high school student as an example, but as I mentioned before, there are other categories that we will be targeting through our recruitment efforts. But beginning with the high school student, identifying it, and let's say hypothetically, this is the cyber fellows pathway. Allowing participation or developing and building apprenticeship programs leading to academic attendance at either a community college system or university system. Both would have a degree aspect, but the community college system could also have a certification program. Beyond that, there would be internship programs that would run parallel to the student's journey through either the community college system or the university system, with either a state, local, community college school or a UNC system institution. And then finally leading to job placement, whether it be in the public sector, which is the preferable route, or using those partnerships that we've developed with our private sector partners, identifying placements in the private sector. Absolutely essential time to really look at our cyber pathways, because the vacancies, as I've said earlier, we had a 19% increase in the vacancies in North Carolina alone just over 2 months. It's not going to start dipping down. The job market is very, very focused on building, not the job market. We are focused on identifying opportunities where we can build up the cyber talent, leveraging the absolutely top-notch university and community college system in the state, and gear that towards a pathway towards public sector service. Keith, did you have anything to add?
Thanks, Rob. As you know, I'm driving through DC right now, but I thought that was well articulated, Rob.
Hey, Rob, one comment I was going to make, and just so everybody's clear, this is kind of the collective collaboration of work that is obviously architected and led by Rob and Keith, and we really appreciate their efforts, but everybody having input, including all the CISOs. But I think it's important to know this work, like the next presentation, is just our initial thoughts and through this over this last several months, and this is really going to is being put forth, if you will, for the entire board to review, comment, elaborate on, add to, and before we approve. So it's something that gets, again, approved by the whole body. I want to thank Jim, you, and Rocco for participating on an ad hoc basis within our committee and input. And then the last point I was going to make on this, and I think many will know, but we get into jargon and we fall into that, but CAEs are the Centers for Academic Excellence. They're typically both community colleges as well as 4 universities that meet certain criteria and then get certification. The thing that's interesting with CAEs, there's a national program tied to the NSA that the NSA CAEs do around this. So it's another resource and collaboration on a national basis that we need to participate in around this space. So that was the only thing I wanted to add, Rob.
Hey, and Rob, let me ask a quick question. When we talk about the transitioning military, it's a service member and their spouse in that target group, correct?
That is correct. Obviously,
Okay, right.
the trailing spouse is an absolutely essential part of the military family, and they should be included.
Okay.
Well, on the other side, I was going to tease and always laugh or joke about a little bit, Jim, is we probably need to include their kids because it's the 12 to 14-year-olds are the technical experts.
No, you're spot on that, and I know Rob's already been out recruiting at high schools, so yes, but we won't get into that now. Any other questions for this group before we move on to the next presentation?
Hey, Rob, Patrick Fleming here of the community college system. Obviously, this is directly in my wheelhouse, and President Stith and I and the team here have been watching, of course, the budget and the funding moving through. We are ready to team up. So I will be reaching out to you and the team, and please, let's get engaged on this one because we've got 58 colleges out there. We also received funding to stand up a cybersecurity program. I've got 9 positions that I just am taking to the board this month and looking forward to hit the ground running in 2022 with a strong cybersecurity program here out of the system office. So plenty of opportunity to collaborate, and this has been a big topic of discussion ever since that budget was passed. So let's get it on.
I am looking forward
to Patrick, Jeff, one real quick one. You guys will need to be foundational, and the leadership really has come out of the community college system. Dr. Green, prior to his retirement at Foresight and stuff, was an absolute leader in the whole NSA CAE initiative. So you're going to get leaned on heavily.
Thank you. That's what we're here for, and that's what we do.
Tracy, did you have your hand up? Okay.
Yeah, I do. Just wanted to chime in. I really like where you're going with this. I wanted to. I know you already are aware of this, but just thinking about using this in a whole ecosystem kind of approach. And here I think not only about the ladders, the career ladders we might create from community college, perhaps even into 4-year university, right, or a sort of further advanced degree into the businesses and corporate sector, and we know that's where that 21,000 right meant to that relates. So that ecosystem, I think, is not only about the progression of the student, but it also has an important potential for the creation, the use, the reuse of the materials. We need not have 50 different entities all competing, right, for those 21,000 degrees. That's a heck of a lot to go around. And so the more we can, as a community educational ecosystem and apprenticeship ecosystem, sort of identify the breadth of the opportunities and work together rather than, right, thinking that I need to get, one more. It's not going to be a zero-sum game by any means. I think there's a great opportunity there. I'm sure you're all aware of that and poised to start it, but I just encourage to be as inclusive as possible, even though I'm representing a university that's the wrong color, blue. But we're really keenly working on exactly this. We've just introduced a master's in cybersecurity in our engineering school, and I'm working. The call that I have following this is with faculty who are both in computer science and in public policy to start talking about what would be a cybersecurity certificate at the university for our own university students who don't want to get a degree necessarily, public policy majors, but they want to demonstrate their awareness of these topics so that they could be competitive for one of those 21,000 jobs. There's no reason our curriculum needs to be fully different from Patrick's or from anybody else's, and there's plenty we can all use and do together. Commercial off. Sorry about that.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead then and move on to Randy and Robbie. I'm not sure who's going to talk next.
Good morning, Secretary Weaver. Randy Chris here. I'll start, and then Lieutenant Colonel Felicia will follow up. So one, thank you all. Just to give a background, just to make sure everybody knows, I'm the Assistant County Manager and CIO for Rowan County. Also serve on our local government IT board that covers all the states and municipalities. Next slide, please. So just to give everyone a feel, and I always love talking about this when we're talking about local governments, is that everybody on this call and part of the board is a member of at least a county within a subset of the state and also possibly a municipality. But what that raises is a challenge because there's so many different varieties of IT centralization from a security perspective that can occur within that. So within those 100 counties, you have different elected officials reporting, Register of Deeds, sheriffs, just the list goes on of how the breakdowns can be. So even if there's a solution for cybersecurity, it may divvy a little bit more from that. There's different funding levels and then also different distress levels, like from NC Commerce with tier 1, 2, and 3. Next slide, please. So with that, you'll see, and just to paint the picture, that cybersecurity maturity varies within the local government space. For counties and municipalities, you have all the way from, what you might consider ideal, which is a full IT staff with a dedicated CISO role, looking at the overarching policy. And of course, you have that at the state level. You also have locations with limited IT staff that may not have that CISO role or dedicated security function, so they're just spreading it across. I'd say that represents where I'm from, along with many others. You also have, cybersecurity that's manned by, a one-man shop that's trying to do everything. And then to that other point, you have smaller locations that are probably in your tier 1s that have just decided to outsource as needed. The main point here, though, and Secretary Weaver mentioned this at first, is, during his opening remarks, we are a function of the state providing those local services. So all of this different variety and, between counties, municipalities, we all provide access to public services through health and human services, tax and vital records, and protecting that data, protecting your data. Because it does exist within local counties, whether that be through library records, sheriffs and criminal, hopefully not, but you've got that. You have other records through library that's protected by federal, so lots of variation here. Next slide, please. So there's been efforts, and there are efforts underway for understanding the threat landscape with such a wide variety. We have the National Cybersecurity Review. I'll talk about that. The National Guard assessments, which of course Lieutenant Colonel Felicia will be able to speak to. DIT, along with 911 Board, has conducted cyber assessments for all of the 911 call centers, the PSAPs. And then we also have CGIS auditing, along with a multitude of others, but those are just some highlights of how we're getting this picture of what local government looks like. Next slide, please.
Hey, Randy, really quick on the National Cybersecurity Review survey. Received the results yesterday that 32 respondents for 2020 compared to 32 respondents from 2019.
Gotcha. And I'll tie to that. So with the National Cybersecurity Review, this was an optional. The state took efforts. It is a subjective review, so you're going through this at will, and that's either municipalities or county. And it's basically looking at your posture of how you do policy compliance and hopefully tracking a trend over time from a local perspective. So possible areas of guidance here that we've identified amongst my peers as guidance from state and peer resources to kind of go through that. But one thing that's interesting, and this raises something for the ITSB, is the way this was tied to North Carolina emergency management grants. So in order to get that level of detail, and just like Rob had mentioned, this does report back to the state for awareness, is getting that understanding and tying that to grant funding. So Rowan County, along with others, aren't able to participate in emergency management grants if they don't complete this survey. Again, subjective review, so hopefully people aren't just checking boxes and getting it complete and really taking the time, but I think that's where the understanding and peer resources come into play. Next slide, please. National Guard assessments. Two things with this. It is a structured process. It's well established and it's repeatable. It does go over both policy review as well as technical aspects. This has been funded through NCDIT and the partnership there, so the counties are definitely appreciative of that. It does take a time commitment from staff. I've heard that from others. The reality is it's worth the time. But again, hearing of so many different levels of how that staff commitment and ranges are, that can be a challenge. And it does actually give you an actionable final report. Next slide, please. Now, from the locals perspective and talking with my peers across the state, I'll A lot of this is aligned near the same time, so it comes across as assessment overload, and I'm sure many of the board members here have a multitude of assessments that you go through. From the locals perspective, it seems new. And so many outside reviews of what can be improved. It gives us insight to what to do as far as budgeting, but there's a lot of it. And I think the locals are ready for the next steps. And I think that's, what the goal of the whole estate that Robbie will get into. Next slide, please. So some of the journeys for better cybersecurity posture that are already in place and upcoming is the SecureWorks eye sensor, the managed intrusion detection that NCDIT is doing and rolling out. And I think there's good traction there, and that's definitely across the board, regardless of the tier status of the county or municipality, is a value. Now, in some cases, it's already been taken care of, but in others, it's clearly a line item that affects budget dollars to help provide insight. We have the assessments, big plays on incident response support with the Joint Cyber Task Force and understanding how to respond to locals during events. I think Colonel Felicio and I have been on, a multitude of events, both boots on ground, and we've learned a lot from seeing this, and especially sitting beside my peers. There's new legislative reporting requirements, and we're making sure the push is there through any path. We are also working with School of Government, Dr. Shannon Tufts there as she trains to make sure that people understand that cyber incidents do require upward reporting to the state for awareness. And then this is just added, and this may be talked about later, but there's also federal grants that are coming through that require state and local. And I just like to say, after sitting in through some of the NACO, or National Association of Counties, I think North Carolina is well poised. And from hearing questions and comments, we have a great working relation. And one, I just want to say I appreciate that from the state to the locals side. Next slide, please. One other item that came out, and this is more of a technical, but I wanted to relate it back, is IP attribution needed for local government. And this is, to help facilitate. You've all heard of, the SolarWinds, the Exchange, all these exploits that are affecting so many locations across the world. This would be akin to efforts that have gone into early 911 addressing and the efforts for GIS. It's nice to say you have an awareness that houses are on fire, but not understanding how to get there and who to help. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Is we're hearing that, there's a vulnerability. We know that it impacts, thousands or tens of thousands. Not being able to understand the network footprint that's publicly exposed. That's one finding that we've clearly seen. It's tremendous. During the Microsoft vulnerability, the Joint Cyber Task Force communicated with over 120 different counties and municipalities to help spread the awareness. And this is in locations that may have had only vendors. So that's one item that's been a takeaway. And I've listed some different ways that this is being seen by the bad guys. So as the state and locals, we need to understand our own environments as well. So next slide, please, and final. So with this, I think that we have the assessments. We have a lot of pieces to the puzzle. We need the state's help, to help put the puzzle together. We understand what's there. We understand those pieces are both staff resources and funding. And so that's what we're trying to do. There's been a lot of alignment for frameworks since at the local level, there's not a formal adherence to any particular type of security framework policy. So we're looking at ways to do that and working with the Guard on that piece, and looking at strategies to be completed before an event. Again, this is protection of the locals' data. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel Felicio. Thank you.
Appreciate the introduction presentation. It's always good to understand kind of the current situation that we have out there. And then moving into how we approach it from a North Carolina perspective. Next slide, please. So basically what you have here is the pillars really of the Joint Cyber Task Force. We realize from a cybersecurity solve this problem alone. All of the malicious actors out there, they target any entity within, and honestly, any entity can get their hands on. So basically these pillars to break, right? To grow on the partnerships. We've been working with Randy and DIT and the other teams for a really long time, and that's why we've been so successful. the things we're going to discuss. Kind of the Cyber 911 happens, what takes place, what are the prevention, and then then kind of the continuous monitoring.
Hey, Colonel Felicio, you may want to shut your video off because your audio is quite choppy.
Is that any better?
It seems that way, Robbie.
How is this?
Loud and clear.
Loud and yep.
Okay. All right. And so one of the beauties with DoD is we do not focus on availability. Unlike critical infrastructure requirements, we focus on security, which means sometimes the bandwidth restrictions that we have create what we just witnessed. So with that being said, going back to the point, I don't know where you heard or didn't hear, but the bottom line is these are the pillars that we have built from a joint cyber task force. Working with partners from federal down to the local level is essential. And we did this together. This wasn't just a guard thing. That's really the biggest takeaway. We talk about the Cyber 911. We talk about the prevention that has to happen continually. We also talk about monitoring the threats nonstop. With all of that, whatever we learn, we have to do some education and we have to rehearse on how we're going to respond with all entities. From a forensics perspective, the big takeaway we're going to talk about is really how do we learn from every event, not just recover from it, learn from it and prevent it from happening again and prevent it from spreading, all right, from the federal side down to the local side through all of our partners. Because that is one of the worst things is when we have repeat events take place that could have been prevented if we would have just shared information. And then when the big things happen, how do we appropriately surge to meet the requirement? When SolarWinds took place, we had assets involved across the state, not just guard, but across the entire team that was able to surge based off of the events that took place. So if it was one, then there was a certain amount of bodies. As it went to over 100 responses, we had to get really smart really quick. And we're going to talk about the surge capability and how we get there when it's required. Next slide, please. So digging in on the Cyber QRF, the 911, we have a team that are focused on incident response. Basically, what has been put in place and based off of the lessons learned, we can be on a scoping call within minutes. So when someone's impacted by an event across the state, it's coordinated through other means, like the normal process that whether it's emergency management or other entities get notified, they start a call with the impacted entity, and then all of the state resources jump on a call. And that's within minutes. We can be on the scene, specifically working side by side with Randy's team. We can be on the scene within hours anywhere in the state. That means a lot when folks are dealing with a ransomware attack that has shut down all of the services in the county. And then the news media gets a hold of that message and spreads it out to the entire state. So they need a team to be on the ground to help them deal with those responses quickly. And it's essential that it happens sooner than later. And then containing the incident. Basically, the responders are there to not allow the event to continue to grow, right? Who else are the impacted connected to? What other assets are out there? How do they appropriately notify folks who are dealing with it? The technical expertise to restore the services as quickly as possible is a piece to the incident responders. So we talk about the forensics and we'll get to that, but really when the event takes place, the number one question everyone wants to know, especially in leadership, is how do they get their services back to whoever needs those services? And we talk about doing that the right way. Summarizing, we'll talk about the details a little bit, but basically we're talking about 20 incidents in the past 12 months that the team has worked through. And each one of those incidents may have had 10 or 20 or other impacted, and we'll talk about that in the end. Security assessment and penetration testing. Why is that lumped together? Well, this really is a cycle. And we'll talk a little bit about that cycle in the next slide, but the biggest takeaway here is over the past 12 months, we've conducted over 50 assessments across the state that are a lot of entities that are out there can't afford to get assessments. And they also want to ensure that the assessments have something that they can repeat on their own, and they can take a report and provide it to their leadership that wasn't done by themselves, to show them, hey, this is in reality what we need to help see ourselves. And we'll talk a little bit about seeing ourselves next. If we could go to the next slide. So basically the strategy here is, number one, you have to see yourself. So that's an assessment that's conducted. And as Randy talked about, it's a complete review of the program itself, the culture and the environment, and then the technical review that happens. So if you have a good security program, but there's no senior leadership that's out there that helps support the program, whether it's with oversight or implementation or resources, then that actually impacts your cyber hygiene. And we provide that to them through this assessment. So as we go through that and we provide them the ultimate report at the end, then there's a remediation time. So here's the report, here's the issues. Then what are you going to do to fix it? So they get a period to fix it. Then we actually test what actually happened. So the penetration testing team then follows on after they've had time to remediate to validate that the fixes are out there. Once the penetration test is completed, we then move into a final remediation after they get findings again. And then once again, the assessment happens. And the reason for that is, just as we all know, we go from Windows 10 to Windows 11 to the next Windows platform, or server 2018 to 2020. It's a continuous cycle. So as technology changes, we need to ensure that we're assessing ourselves appropriately. We're given appropriate time to remediate, and then we have to test and validate. And it's a cycle that continues. Next slide, please. Next pillar there is the continuous monitoring. So what we have seen in the past is that there are multiple alerts that take place. The biggest question is, who's looking at the alerts when something bad happens, and what do you do about it? We've been to multiple places where the systems were in place, but no one was actually looking at the system. So it could have been prevented. We could have stopped millions of dollars worth of impact had we had a resource looking at a tool or paid attention to a global thing. This is always out there. So what the team does is we have worked with the IT and Randy's team. We have visibility over 150 different state partners' environments. And what do I mean by that? So there's tools that are in place that we can see when the threats cross the boundaries of the network or are crossing through the network. When that happens, the teams notify the impacted individuals and send them the details so that they can target what they're looking at. No one hates chasing false positives more than I. And that's one of the things that the continuous monitoring team does, is they ensure that they focus on the things that are real threats and they notify the entities. The next pillar is the training and outreach. Big thing here is we talk about, well, what's important now? As we learn about threats that are out there, whether it's cyber hygiene best practices or an upcoming election security requirement, potentially something web-based, or even if it's continuity of operations planning. All of those things, we've done over 20 to 30 training events, multiple tabletop exercises, ransomware tabletop exercises, all in an effort to continue to train and to provide outreach based off of the lessons that we're learning from the field. So as things are happening at the county level, we want others to learn from it, whether it's at the county or even taking some of those sanitized lessons learned up to the federal level and share them to help stop the nation state actors that are out there. This is the most important parts. Next slide, please. Now we jump into the forensics team. So this pillar is, from a foundation perspective, one of the things that's a little bit newer, but it's definitely one of the most important things. And the reason for that is, if we go into an environment after an attack took place and all we do is rebuild, then we never learn how to stop this attack from occurring. And that's one of the most important pieces, because a lot of times what we've heard from other partners is no one really wants to share information. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But we have to have the right information to share. So we want to know, hey, when we go in, this is how the attack took place. And I want to share the sanitized indicators of compromise as wide and as far as possible across the boundaries of state and local entities and throughout the federal, state, local governments. throughout all the critical infrastructure partners. Now, finally is the surge capability support. So this one is big. So from a guard perspective, we primarily have about 40 bodies that are generally working this on a regular basis. But we have over 11,000 soldiers and airmen that are out there that bring civilian skill sets, working across the sectors, whether it's Cisco, Microsoft, FireEye, they're all out there. So when a capability is required, what we do is we do very much with what one county does for another, almost like a mutual aid. We call in for that specialty to come from an M-Day perspective, put them on state active duty, and we bring them to the fight for that current mission. And then we scale that up based off of what's out there. Same principles apply. And then across the team, this allows us the ability to, when we have 10 entities that are impacted across the state, then we can divide and conquer and help advise and assist in those areas and surge as required. Next slide. What you see here is just a summary from 2019 to 2020 into 2021. You can see the trends. 2020 was definitely a high volume, especially when you're talking about towards the end of the year with regards to the SolarWinds attack. But then moving right into 2021 with Microsoft proxy login hack, right? You see how many exposed organizations were out there. So I say that to say the trend is going to continue to grow. And when things are out there that are targeting our critical infrastructure and we are aware of the vulnerabilities that are out there, we need a way so that we can share information across the sectors at lightning speed. And that's kind of one of the takeaways for us. Next slide. Forward. What we talked about in the past is this Joint Cyber Task Force is something that we have from a bunch of volunteers who truly believe in the work that's being done and has been done since 2014. And honestly before, but that's really when the group really started working together. So we want to formalize the mission for the Joint Cyber Task Force, formalize an actual charter, continue to focus on the outreach and training from all the lessons learned of the task force, and get the information out as soon as possible. Ultimately, creating a place where that when indicators of compromise, any threats, or any type of intelligence sharing is required, we have a formalized SOP that creates a sanitized and safe way to stop attacks from spreading across the state, up and down, from local to federal side of the house, and then ultimately through the entire nation, right, through our fusion centers and other partners. This is really kind of the pillars that we were talking about, something obtainable that we can measure and work towards over the next year. So pending any questions, gentlemen, that concludes my brief.
One thing, Jim, if I may comment to everybody. First of all, I hope everybody, I appreciate everybody's time constraints, but you can see the work of the committee, both in the things that we're doing directly and the things these guys are doing in their day-to-day careers. It's spectacular. I mean, it's just amazing, the workload and the expertise that we have. It's going to sound maybe a little hokey, but man, it makes you proud to be a North Carolina resident and citizen. Truly does. And with that, what I would like to do for the other committee members, oversight board members, and others that are maybe not currently part of the cybersecurity committee, for anyone that has a need to satisfy their nerd component and or just has a desire to be in the know, I'd love to personally extend an invitation for you guys to set in. We, again, have a standing monthly meeting. If you'll let Rob or myself know, you're always welcome to either become a permanent member of our committee and serve on both. There's no reason not to, as well as just jump in from month to month as you have a desire, and we'll let people know topically what we're covering. Patrick, I assume we're going to draft you regardless to be part of our group. So looking forward.
Absolutely, 100%. It's fantastic. Unfortunately, a few of our community colleges have had significant malware attacks, and I can't say enough about the quality of service that these teams have provided. as well as the response from my team. I think it's been purely outstanding to unfortunate situations, and business disruptions, are never taken lightly, but we have had just an outstanding response to unfortunate situations. Can't say enough about the quality. Thank you.
Yep. And just the last comment, I mean, the conversations and the work, I mean, it truly is fascinating what's going on. So this is good stuff. So thank you guys and the team.
Rob, do you have a comment, question before I got some follow-up here?
Certainly. I just wanted to take a moment to personally thank Randy and Colonel Felicio for pulling all this information together. And I want to call out to the ITSB as a body the necessary or the necessity of inclusion of the two groups that both Randy and Colonel Felicio represent. We are all equal partners in the Joint Cybersecurity Task Force. If we were to, as a body, not have the National Guard, obviously that would be a significant diminishing of capabilities, and the pathway to recovery for affected entities would be extremely longer than what it is presently. I want to take a moment to focus on Randy Kress and his fellow North Carolina Local Government Information Systems Association IT Cyber Strike Team members. If we as a state were to go into an affected entity on the local government side, absent the Nickel G's IT Cyber Strike Team, we would get a variety of responses in terms of the willingness to receive the support from the state. What the Nickel G's IT Cyber Strike Team provides, beyond the expertise and the extreme expertise and the capabilities, is that peer-to-peer view. And I think Randy called this out on one of his slides in his deck. That's an essential part to the success of the Joint Cybersecurity Task. Someone to come alongside the effort and say, yes, we are from the government, we're here to help, and we will help. Not just hearing that from the state government perspective, but from a peer, a neighboring county, from the National Guard, somebody who lives in the community that's impacted. So that's an absolutely essential part of the success of the Joint Cybersecurity Task Force. I'm honored to be a part and with these equal partners.
Okay. I was going to just add that we're very fortunate. At any given time, we are basically funding 15 to 16 full-time National Guard men and women to support us on the cyber mission. I can't even begin to describe to you the exponential return on investment for this that we have here with the efforts that are underway in North Carolina. It's a very easy discussion for me to have with key legislative members. Representative Sain, Senator Heiss in particular, know full well. We talk about it often, and there's an ongoing commitment to make sure that we continue with this funding because of the immense value that it brings to all of North Carolina. It's unbelievable. So again, thank you all for that. I did want to comment real quickly. I know we also have a privacy component to this committee. Just to make everyone aware that our state's first chief privacy officer will be here on Monday. Cherie Givens. And so at a future meeting, we will make sure that we give Cherie an opportunity to come and talk a little bit about privacy and what she's going to be looking to establish here within North Carolina. She has an immense background. She's currently departing from Booz Allen, Hamilton, where she's been doing a lot of work up at the Beltway, in particular with CDC, as you can imagine, over the last 2 years. So a phenomenal talented individual coming and will be a phenomenal asset to our team. And again, having that balance between cyber and privacy as we go ahead and move forward with things. Randy, just to comment on something that you made mention of as far as the overwhelming number of activities underway. We feel that at the state level too. So it's not just all of you at the local level, although I'm sure we compound the problem. But one of the things we're trying to address at the national level through our National State CIO organization, NASCIO, is really the harmonization of these federal regulations. And then also I like to add in our modernization and interpretation, because, we got some regs that still go back to the days of Watergate, and the way the security was written up was how you kept a piece of paper in a filing cabinet, and the regs never been updated to reflect 2021. And then interpretation, especially when you look at things like CJIS, right? CJIS is interpreted 50 different ways across the state or across the country. And so it would be nice if we could get Department of Justice, FBI, whomever to kind of get a consistent framework around CGIS interpretation as well. And then lastly, Rob, if you would, since we were in Lexington last week, just if you could just give like 30 seconds as to what all the state CIOs were talking about in regards to cyber, and then maybe a little real quick on the ransomware bill that got passed as well.
Certainly. Well, getting back
put you on the spot.
Well, so getting back to my presentation on cyber pathways, it was a overwhelming consensus from the state CISOs that were present that there is a dire need to develop similar to what I had shared with you earlier. Several jurisdictions have significant challenges that would impact their ability to stave off threats. So that was one aspect. Obviously, recurring funding came up beyond the IIJA and the challenges that were presented across those other jurisdictions as well. Just a moment on the Joint Cybersecurity Task Force. I cannot tell you how many individual and separate conversations I've had with other jurisdictions who want to know more about how we succeed in this model. Other states have challenges with the practices of their National Guard members, and how we have affected such a flexible and reactive model, or proactive model. So ongoing conversations with several of my counterparts. Now with IIJA, of the time that we spent in Lexington, Kentucky, this had to be the single most engagements that we had as a body. There is very little agreement across the jurisdictions that were present on how the IIJA should be modeled. There is an understanding of the state match component to it, and there's also an agreement that we really don't know what exactly is a permissible spend and what's not. So we presented a number of different questions as a body. We generated a number of different questions that the legislative affairs folks at NASCIO will take to both CISA and MS-ISAC to really get a good, solid, true north heading on how states should proceed with the IIJA. I hope, Secretary.
Okay, and real quick on the ransomware bill.
Ransomware bill, there is legislation that was codified, or the legislation or language in the budget bill that prohibits the payment of ransom by state, local, and education entities in North Carolina. That is not a DIT-sponsored piece of legislation, but we've strongly supported and are happy to have it.
Okay. Okay, Tracy, you got a question?
Yeah, just a little bit on that last one, Rob, and I don't want to open a can of worms, but one of the things our folks have been thoughtful about with respect to prohibitions or statements that ransomware payments aren't acceptable is this whole new world they've moved into with a double extortion and the notion that even if you've got backups, right, and you don't need to pay the ransomware, the fact that I might threaten to release your data creates a different kind of responsibility or response for us. And I just wonder the extent to which that might be something that perhaps it's already been fully vetted and thought through. But I don't know if the state or its agencies get into a precarious position as it relates to the data of individuals that might then get released to the public, depending on how sensitive it is. And I can imagine, public health and others. So just a comment that this is all very, very complex in I think all of our estimations, but we appreciate all the great work you're doing.
Certainly. If I could just for a moment, I want to tap into Colonel Felicio and Randy Kress's experience with past ransomware incidents, but I want to add my preamble to that. It's been our experience that despite a previous payment of ransom, you cannot determine whether or not you are going to be able to decrypt the data with a key that will or won't be provided. So that's one challenge that we face. But Randy, I'll turn it over to you to give your experience and perspective.
Yeah, and from a local perspective, one, taking away that ability We all know this relates to, especially through payment, how you engage with your cyber liability provider. And just recently, after we've really started digging in, realized that, many of the counties would have never been able to pay that much anyway, even though they can go through the process. But as you mentioned on the double extortion, it does. I've been witness to a couple of situations that when you have the option on the table and you're in the double extortion, you feel this responsibility. And to Rob's point, and very valid, the payment doesn't prevent the threat actor from releasing or selling it to somebody else that's going to release it. But it does put your elected officials, local elected officials, whether it be K-12, county, municipal, in a situation where they feel this responsibility that if they don't act. So one, that's where a very strong support of the bill comes in play, because when it's taking it off the table, it removes that responsibility. So I'll say kudos to that. I really think that helps. And I wish it would have been in place in about a year and a half ago. So, but thank you.
Okay. And then one last comment before we move on. We are aware that the FCC added cyber, and just the one word cyber, into an allowable expense when we look at 911 funding. So we are trying to understand better what that really means. And that'll be a topic that we'll address through the 911 board. As Randy had commented, that we had gone out and assessed all the PSAPs and the network connectivity to the next gen 911 network. And as you can imagine, there's vulnerabilities and various stages of vulnerabilities, but we saw about 8 to 10 common themes. And now that we're aware of this, we should be doing everything that we can to try to mitigate and remediate. So that'll be something that hopefully we can help our local partners out with as well. Rob, did you have one last thing?
Yes, Mr. Secretary. Al Roethlisberger, are you available right now? Are you on the call?
I am indeed.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to point out another, directive from the TSA that it directly impacts rail, and I want to allow Al Roethlisberger to give his take from his vantage point as the IT transportation CISO, and then I'll follow up with what we learned from NASIO. So, Al, if you want to provide your understanding of the rail directive.
Yeah, I apologize. We've got some new kittens, so I'm trying to corral this one that wants to really visit with everyone. So
that is so pandemic. I don't know if that's not pandemic, I don't know what
it. That's right. So actually, we found this out through a State Scoop article, which you can search. If I can find an email, I'll put it in the chat here in a little bit. But it looks like the feds are directing. We're not sure if it's both public and private at this point, but directing those with rail services to perform annual assessments against a set of undefined standards at this point, and report those up to the federal government, which on the face of it sounds like not a bad thing to do. However, we all already do roll up a lot of reporting through various mechanisms to the feds. There's also issues of disclosure. It's also an issue of resources. Sometimes something might sound like a good idea, but if you're already doing it in 3 different ways, is that really an efficiency for the state? Now, DOT has a rail division. I'm sure you all have seen the trains that we operate across the state of North Carolina. And so I'm very curious to see to what degree this will apply to our infrastructure and what kind of tasks we'll have to take on to be compliant if they are applicable. So with that, Rob, you've got some news.
So I took the directive to NASIO, and the Legislative Affairs Director for NASIO is trying to get a clear understanding from the TSA and other bodies inside the Beltway as to what the applicability is, what resources would be available, and if there's any exceptions to the directive based on existing processes as Al described. That's all I wanted to mention, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Okay. And then I see Colonel Felicio, you have your hand up, I believe.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just wanted to point out that when we were talking about ransomware and paying it, it's just important to note that just because we pay the ransomware doesn't mean that the threat actors are removed from the environment so that they could potentially come back at any given time. So it's essential that we understand that if we pay and we allow it to continue without a complete rebuild, we're unsure if they are still left in the environment. That's all, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments, conversation for cyber? And I think we just, well, we lost Jeff probably at a 10:30, but again, thank you all that have been working on this. As you can see, they're moving mountains as best possible. So we appreciate all those efforts. And again, I can truly tell you, North Carolina is looked at as a shining example of what needs to be done. And it's with great pride that I can talk about that at all these national discussions and the great work that we're doing here in North Carolina. So with that, let's move on to another exciting topic. So my transition here to North Carolina, the governor made it very clear: broadband, broadband, broadband. I think I had to spell it backwards, is what I said, just to make sure I understood the importance of this to Governor Cooper. And so, rocking his Carolina blue, I'm going to turn it over to Nate Denny, our Deputy Secretary for Broadband and Digital Equity, and he'll talk a little bit about all the things that are underway now that we have a state budget and what the broadband folks are looking to do. So, Nate.
Thank you, Secretary Weaver. I appreciate it, and thank you for shouting out the right shade of blue here as well. I'm Nate Denny, Deputy Secretary for Broadband and Digital Equity. I wanted to quickly talk through a few items here for the board. If we can, I'm not sure who's managing the slides, but if you could go ahead and skip forward another one. I've presented to this board a couple of times now on broadband, but let me just quickly highlight again Governor Cooper's directive to us, and it's to build a full state of digital equity in North Carolina. And that definition of digital equity really ties back to the digital transformation comments that Ms. Futhy made previously, and that's we want a North Carolina in which all individuals and communities have the access to technology they need, to the actual connection, the means to afford it, and the devices and digital skills necessary to fully participate in the modern economy and in democracy, for that matter, right? So, I think the work of this board in making sure that government services are available to the people of North Carolina, I think ties in perfectly with this, and I look forward to working with the subcommittee or the committee on that issue moving forward. If we can move on to another slide, please. Thank you. These are the specific targets that the governor has established for us. We want to move to 98% of North Carolinians with access to an actual high-speed internet connection. And when I say high speed there, I don't just mean the current FCC definition of broadband of 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. We need a future-proof state, right? We need access to significantly higher speeds than that to allow our residents to work from home, learn from home, access telemedicine services, seek jobs, so on and so forth. So that standard is 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits per second upload speeds, consistent with the speed thresholds in the American Rescue Plan, which is the source of federal funding that will be helping us address this need. And I've got 95% there in quotes and I think this board knows that, knows some of this background, but the best data we've got about connectivity is based on FCC data that comes from the provider community, but is defined at the census block level. So if a single household in a given census block is served at broadband speeds, the FCC considers the entire census block served. That's how we get to the alleged 95% access rate here in North Carolina, but we know that that's dramatically overstated in North Carolina. And so we've got to go from a fake 95% to a real 98%. And then the governor established very clear adoption or subscription targets as well. We want 80% of North Carolina's households to subscribe to a high-speed internet service. We want to not just have a statewide average of 80%, we want to hit that average within demographic groups. Fortunately, the numbers are all right here, so I don't have to try to recall them as I've had to a few times recently, but white households in North Carolina subscribe at a rate of about 76%. Black, Latino, and Native American households all lag considerably behind that. So we want to make the investments we're making both in infrastructure and to address affordability and digital literacy in communities to make sure that everyone realizes the benefits of these investments. And then most importantly, we want a 100% subscription rate for households in North Carolina with school children in them. We want to permanently close what's called the homework gap in North Carolina, by which students, I'm not sure where the applause emoji or animation came from, but thank you. But the North Carolina students receive, especially as hard textbooks are less available, they receive homework assignments that require an internet connection, but they don't necessarily have internet at home. And you hear the stories about people going to McDonald's parking lots or elsewhere to try to complete basic school assignments, which is obviously not an equitable approach for this state. So those are the top line targets. If we could jump to the next slide. The governor proposed a $1.2 billion plan using American Rescue Plan funds from the federal government. The General Assembly funded that at a level of $1.036 billion. Really a transformational, generational investment in closing the digital divide in North Carolina. The vast majority of those funds will go to addressing infrastructure needs, including the state's current Great Grant program, which is has the benefit of already existing, so we can deploy it much more quickly, but has awarded about $15 million a year over the last 4 years. So we've got to scale up pretty dramatically to use $350 million in ARPA funds and an additional $30 million in state funds due to a recurring appropriation from the Capital Infrastructure Fund that goes into that program. We received $400 million for a very exciting new program called the Completing Access to Broadband program, which is based on the governor's request for a more flexible, agile tool that we can use. The Great Grant has been very effective for addressing last mile needs in rural parts of the state, but it's a very prescriptive process. The General Assembly created a very detailed scoring scheme for that program, and Completing Access to Broadband will allow the state to match our ARPA funds with county ARPA funds, work together to identify a delineated area of unserved households, and put out an RFP to go directly to the market to try to address those unserved areas. We think this is going to give us much more flexibility, allow the state to be much more strategic in addressing unserved and underserved areas. So we're very excited about that. The governor also proposed $90 million, or the governor proposed $100 million. We got $90 million of it for stopgap solutions, which is really anything sub-fiber deployment, right? We know the American Rescue Plan guidance sets very clear speed thresholds and has an explicit fiber preference. They want to make sure that the federal investments are going into high capacity, high speed network deployment. But we know that fiber is not going to be the solution in every community. We know that other technologies will be key. There are going to be areas where fiber deployment isn't immediately practical, or where cost and schedule are going to be real challenges. And so we need a flexible tool that we can use to fund things like tower replacement or construction, downtown Wi-Fi, things like that, anything that's just not that major fiber deployment. But again, another flexible tool that we can use directly with local governments, education institutions, other community anchors to address needs in a given community. We received $100 million for replacement of utility poles, which is an issue that's gotten a fair amount of attention in the General Assembly this year as an obstacle to broadband deployment. And then importantly, given the FCC mapping and data issue that I referenced a couple of slides back, $1 million for a comprehensive location-based state map so that we have a precise view of who's served, unserved, or underserved across our state, and so that we can better illustrate who is facing challenges in the digital divide, not just on access to infrastructure, but also in the realms of affordability and device access as well. On that front, we received $50 million over 4 years to address digital literacy needs. So this is skills training, device support for low-income households, and raising awareness of the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a subsidy program that exists for low-income households to help bring down the cost of internet subscriptions. This is really key because we know we're never going to hit that 100% household with school children rate if we don't address the affordability challenge. So, and then $15 million to operationalize the whole thing, which is, I think, going to help us do some, not all, but some of the scaling up we need to do to take this program from a 15 million a year grant making operation to $1 billion. We obviously are sorry, I bumped my mute button. Touchpad mouse things are tough for me. So anyway, we know that we're going to have considerable work to do in managing the risk of this program. We've got to move very quickly, but we also have to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And so we will be looking to identify partnerships that help us on grant management, program management, governance, and risk management so that we can have program evaluation, grant integrity, and audit services built in with our partners so that we are using these funds as effectively as possible. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. On top of the $1 billion that the governor and the General Assembly have directed to this program, we're also awaiting additional resources from President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure package, which directed $65 billion to closing the digital divide across the country. Of that, here are a couple of highlights just for you to be aware of. I think the most exciting piece is an additional $14.2 billion for the Affordable Connectivity Program that I referenced earlier. That is a program by which low-income households can see whether their provider is participating, confirm their eligibility, and then get a $30 per month discount on their internet service. One of the challenges here will be that it actually reduces the subsidy from $50 to $30 per month. This is a program that was actually started in the CARES Act as the emergency broadband benefit at a $50 a month rate, and it only had an additional or an initial $3.2 billion appropriation. That money has kind of flown off the shelf. North Carolina, for example, already has 313,000 enrollees in this program. So we know the program is making a real impact for households across our state, but already more than 30% of that program has been claimed, that initial $3 billion. So we're excited about the additional $14 billion. It's very clear that internet affordability isn't a COVID problem. It's a permanent problem that needs to be addressed. The governor called for significant investments in addressing the costs of high-speed internet, and we're glad that the feds will be able to address this challenge here. But we've got to think about how we can mitigate the harm caused from that reduction for the 313,000 North Carolina households that have already enrolled. There's an additional major infusion of cash in infrastructure investment. The new NTIA Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program will bring $42 billion to the states. The thing the Biden administration and Congress have done best here is, instead of relying on federal programs to directly invest, they're going into the states where the planning is more localized and more strategic, tied to local needs. So we're very excited about that. A number of the funding pots in this BEAD program are formula driven. So we're not sure what our ultimate dollar figure will be here, but there's an initial minimum allocation of $100 million per state. It goes to 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and then an additional $100 million split up by remaining territories. If we just got our 153rd share of the BEAD program as is, then that'd be an additional $800 million roughly for our infrastructure programs. Now, we don't know how the formula will shake out. North Carolina has the second highest rural population in the nation, considerable geographic diversity. I think for high cost formulas and unserved formulas, the state will be pretty competitively positioned for some of these funds. But again, we have to wait until the NTIA does its notice of funding opportunity in about 5 months. And these funds will also be tied to the completion of FCC maps that should happen later this year, hopefully. So we've got a little time before these get here, and we'll be trying, of course, to address need with the initial American Rescue Plan investment from the governor and the General Assembly. I also mentioned just a couple other things coming with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a $1 billion competitive grant program for middle mile, which is very exciting. North Carolina has an incredible existing middle mile network and set of assets here between MCNC and others. Certainly DOT is doing incredible work to run fiber along I-95 and US 70 out to Morehead City. So we've already got a lot of these assets in place, but these will help us close some gaps. So we will be working with a number of entities across the state to kind of strategize on driving some of these funds to North Carolina. And then there are millions of dollars for digital equity planning and capacity building. Fortunately, in North Carolina, Governor Cooper created our new Office of Digital Equity and Literacy. So that, in parallel with our Broadband Infrastructure Office, make up our division of broadband and digital equity. And having those structures already in place, I think we will be able to hit the ground really quickly and use these funds effectively. Next slide, please. And then this is I'll send this around to board members, but this is a draft strategic planning document for our division of broadband and digital equity that really emphasizes those dual needs of expedience and good stewardship of taxpayer dollars, and kind of breaks our work down along operational lines, affordability, digital literacy, access to infrastructure, expanding the actual fiber connections, and then mapping that underpin all of our work. I won't go through it in great detail here, and it's probably too small to read on the slide anyway, but I'll make sure everybody has a copy as we get this finalized. Next slide. And then this is just for everyone's understanding, a quick map of the existing capabilities in our division. I mentioned the Broadband Infrastructure Office, which is a 9 or 10 person operation that has been responsible for administering the great grants to this point, that roughly $15 million a year over the last 4 years, providing technical support to communities across the state. We've got a number of experts on that team, some of whom I think have joined the call today, who work directly with counties, building their digital equity plans, negotiating with internet providers, helping identify assets in a community that can help deploy or expand infrastructure. And that's really a critical part of the state's work already. That work is only going to expand as we have, especially that $400 million pot for the CAB program, that state and county RFP matching pool of funds. And then over on the side, our major areas of need on capacity, where we'll be going out to vendors or other consultants to build partnerships and address, I already mentioned governance, risk management, project and grant management, and mapping as the major needs here. So our hope is to, now that the American Rescue Plan funds have been appropriated and we're waiting on certification of those funds from OSBM to the department, so that we can move out and procure the support we need to execute these funds and projects effectively. And then quickly, this kind of encapsulates our major immediate priorities. The capacity needs I just referenced. We'll be putting out a mapping RFP in the coming weeks to try and get to that granular view of who has service in North Carolina. We plan to announce in the next couple of days, I hope, a timing for opening the first round of great grant applications. So that's that $350 million pot of funds with the existing program. I think we'll also seek to identify some pilot counties to move out CAB funds, especially in counties that have already been thinking about how they want to work with the market and try to address broadband needs. So we should have news on that and hopefully have both of those programs up and running in January. In the absence of state funding for affordability mechanisms, our goal is to just drive up enrollment in the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program and try to raise awareness of that work, and then build the partnerships that we've already discussed in prior presentations of the governor's plan around getting devices to low-income households and making direct community investments on digital equity capacity. And then, of course, as we execute on the American Rescue Plan funds, we have to also continue building out our plans for the subsequent Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding, and making sure that the state and providers and communities across the state are all competitive for those funds. So those are kind of top tier priorities for us. And I think that's it for me. That's plenty. So I'm happy to take any questions from the board. Thank you, Jim, and members of the board, for your time.
Okay, any questions for Nate?
I've got a question. Nate, if you could explain some, I've had some concerns about the breakdown of the $1 billion rural broadband item, and I was under the opinion, as were many of the legislators I spoke with, that the majority of the $1 billion was for rural broadband infrastructure construction. And I'm just, I would like a better explanation, I'm sure everybody else would, of items. I think there was 400 million to completing access to broadband, and $100 million, excuse me, to pole replacement. That would mean roughly $500 million, as I understand it, would be going to large incumbent ISPs. I'm just concerned about that. Could you maybe speak more to this or explain this completing access to broadband a little bit better? I would appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Poplin, for your question and for your ongoing focus on this critical mission area for the department. The overall infrastructure investment, deploying infrastructure across the state, is actually more than what you said. It's actually about $970 million total. Now, $1 million of that is for us to map, right? But in terms of what goes out to the providers, there are 3 primary buckets that will be available to the provider community. One, the state's existing competitive GREAT grant program. That's $350 million of American Rescue Plan funds, and plus the $30 million of recurring SCIF funds there. $400 million for the Completing Access to Broadband program, and I'll dig into that a little bit more. And then the $100 million reimbursement program for communication providers that are replacing utility poles in support of broader broadband projects. Those are the 3 main areas. All of those, well, the GREAT grant and the CAB program are both competitive, right? So I imagine, certainly we at the department are provider neutral, and as with any procurement, want transparency and competition throughout the program. I do think the state benefits from and you and I have talked about this, a diversity of participants and providers. We especially value the participation of our rural electric co-ops, who have done so much to connect rural parts of the state, and we hope will continue to participate in these programs. They are critical. There are a number of smaller local operations that are critical. We certainly hope that the major incumbent providers will continue to participate in these programs, and we believe we will, but it's going to take the entire provider community, and they'll all have to compete. In the last 4 rounds of the Great Grant Program, I believe 2 of the major incumbent providers have been active participants there. Every indication is that more will play with this larger pot of funds, but we shall see. But a great number of small providers and rural co-ops have been beneficiaries of these funds up to this point and participate in that program, and will continue to be. That's, I think, really important to us, is making sure that a number of different provider types are able to participate. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the additional funds that will come down from President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure package, will go a step further and prohibit the exclusion of co-ops, publicly owned networks, and some of the co-ops are able to participate here in North Carolina. Municipally run networks are not able currently to participate in that Great Grant Program, but with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funds, they will be required to be able to play. So again, the department's view, the administration view, is that the more providers that we can attract to invest in North Carolina, the better outcome for residents across the state. And we will continue to do everything we can to make sure that those funds are competitively awarded, transparently allocated and managed, and that we are reaching out to and engaging providers of all types to address this need. I hope that at least partially addresses your question, Dr. Poplin.
Thank you.
Ms. Fusey, I think you have a question.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Nate, for this great presentation. There's really a lot to like in what you've described, right? Not only the funds available, but also I hear the reference to the competitive nature, right? And otherwise of those of vying for the funds, and the state and municipality options for engaging. That's all fantastic, I think, and a necessary component. I also find, though, that there's going to be an element of successfully implementing this that perhaps we haven't fully explored or may need further exploration, and that is the careful balance of pushing and promoting from the top down, and directing those ISPs, those commercial entities, to say, okay, yes, you might be able to add capacity in some of your more lucrative areas, right? But boy, do you have to serve the less well-served areas now, and that is necessarily going to have a much, much lower profit motive for them. So I wonder about the early thoughts or efforts to establish whether it's a set of principles, guidelines, rules, requirements, or limitations, more in the sense of, utility funding and allowable profits, that would really guide and ensure that 30 or so % of the state and those many counties that list themselves as less than 50% having access. How do we know at the end of the day that $1 billion that Gerald references went specifically, or at least 900 million of it went specifically to help those states and those individual residents who are underserved now, rather than what we might be concerned about on the cynical side, lining the pockets of folks who really want to have more and more broadband available to the people who can already most afford it and are most served?
It's an excellent question, and I think there are several points I'd like to make in answering. One, the Great Grant Program in particular already comes with, every round that we've administered to this point has come with specific requirements in a given grant agreement for the grantee to meet, right? So we track performance, we measure their progress, and the funds are only made available as reimbursements for costs that have already been executed by the provider, right? So they have to perform to get the funds in the first place. I think that's a really important feature of the program. Second, the prioritization of these funds, both within federal guidance tied to the use of American Rescue Plan funds for broadband purposes, and in state statute for the GREAT Grant program and the Completing Access to Broadband program, are to address unserved areas specifically. So all of these funds will go to areas that do not currently have 25/3 service. So that's another safeguard there for that program. The third thing I want to say is, to your point about us being able to make sure that we're not just kind of biting off the most profitable areas. One of the benefits of that CAB program, the Completing Access to Broadband program, is that it allows the state and counties to be more proactive. With the GREAT grants, all we did was wait for providers to come to us, right? They outline their project, they come to us, we run it through the 12-point scoring criteria, we spit out a score, we say, all right, your application scores 27 points, and that makes it 6th best application we've got, and we got enough funds for 12 applications, so you get funds, go have fun, right? Obviously, we had rigorous oversight of those funds and tracking for compliance issues, but at the end of the day, the providers came to us and told us what was needed. The benefit of the mapping effort we're doing and this CAB program is that we'll be able to go out, identify areas of need. We'll work directly with counties to help them craft the appropriate delineated area that addresses the unserved households in that county. And then we'll go to the market and say, we need you to cover this. And, I think, I expect us to get better results from that program long-term than we've even been able to get from the GREAT grant. And where we can't get it, where the market doesn't respond, I think that we're just illustrating the case for a more direct investment moving forward, right? So we will be able to build our business case, right, for additional, more directed, proactive approaches from the state that will help us use the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funds even more directly to address needs. So I think your concern is a valid one. It's one that I think underpins all of our work and kind of strategizing. I think we've got the tools in place, though, to make sure that the providers are addressing the areas we really need them to.
Yeah, and a couple of things to add to your comments. I'm sorry, Tracy. One is that, I know we're focused and we're talking a lot about rural areas. We got this problem in our urban areas. You can just go downtown in Raleigh and see it as well, and Southeast Raleigh and places in Charlotte as well. So we have to make sure we're addressing this as a holistic state issue. And then secondly, we do have those metrics that we're going to really work very hard to achieve that the governor has laid out in front of us. And so again, getting access to critical data is going to be key as well. And that's data from our providers, and it's also leveraging other maybe state systems that can get us to help us drive to better decisions as to where we're going, because we know the FCC census block data, it's a slippery slope. There's a lot of extrapolation, and you know how quickly that can go awry. So we want to try to get as granular as possible to down to the household level, so we know that we're making an impact and not talking at an aggregate level. So I'm sorry, Tracy, you were going to say something else?
No, it's okay. I don't want to monopolize. Let somebody else chime in. Thank you.
So Jim, I have a question. That's Rock DeSanto here. So related to this, and I understand the focus, and obviously we're looking to ultimately deliver service to the household. I hope that someone's looking at the gestalt of all of this, that we're not sort of building islands, but that there is a comprehensive plan that we're going to tie all of the communities together, or all of the state together, or all of the counties together. So we're not just building out this pocket, but then it's isolated from what's going on in the next county, and that we're not really coordinating the effort, so that in effect, we're not looking to maximize what any given county gets, but to optimize what the whole system is across the state when we finish. Nate, can you tell me a little bit about that? Or is that really what the 8 or 10 people that, you know, are going to be managing, looking at, or are they literally just looking at these, you know, sort of with blinders on, focused on a particular project, but not really looking? And then in fact, we've got these siloed effects as opposed to having a comprehensive rollout across the state.
I appreciate the question. One of the benefits of the current statutory requirements of the program are that it caps each county's awards, right? So we have to make sure that the funds are spread out across the state. It also opens up for the first time the grant funds to all counties in the state. The funds actually started out limited to Tier 1 economically distressed counties. Eventually, Tier 2 was added. Now we've got all counties, Tier 1, Tier 2, and then rural census tracts in Tier 3 counties as well. And so we're able to do investments that are more comprehensive in nature. I think that the limits on an individual county's award will make sure that we're addressing holes across the state. I think that the 3 major parallel programs will also help us, right? I think the great grants that will be provider driven, the CAB program where we will go out and try to fix remaining unserved areas, and then that stopgap measures approach that I referenced that was the governor's proposal to address anywhere that's kind of fallen through the cracks, right, where a major fiber deployment won't be immediately practical. I think that allows us to take a more comprehensive approach once we've got all the mapping in place, right? Once we're able to identify with some sense of accuracy what the served, unserved, and underserved areas in the state are. The other thing that helps us, I think, weave communities and counties together is a focus both within our current programs and especially in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funds that will come to us probably late next year, is a real focus on community anchor institutions that kind of tie these communities together. We will seek in our CAB RFPs that we work on with counties to identify specific anchor institutions that have needs in a community. So we're not just picking some households over here, picking some households over there, but really trying to make sure that entire community, businesses and major institutions there benefit from these investments. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will have considerable middle mile funds that the state can access. As I mentioned, the competitive grant program for middle mile, North Carolina already benefits from that really strong middle mile network through the state's MCNC or the MCNC assets and others. Right. But the funds are designed to not just bite off little chunks here and there, but really weave it all together, and that will be a major focus of ours.
So, and certainly understand the part about MCNC, the middle mile, and the access that they provide around the state. Now, I believe, and Tracy may have the number on this, I think all 100 counties now. Initially, when BTOP was built, it was something less, but at this point, now have footprint everywhere. So, when DOT does their build out, are those assets going to be made available to the rest of the provider community, or is this just, is DOT going to segregate that portion and only DOT is going to be able to use that?
I don't know if there's anyone from DOT on the board meeting who can speak with a little more specific project knowledge, but my understanding is that DOT is working with a concessionaire that will then seek to monetize segments of the middle mile network that they're deploying and make those available for last mile providers, right? So those strands of fiber aren't just going to sit there, in a vacuum for the state. They're going to turn around and benefit the communities that surround those areas across 95 and US 70. Similarly, any use of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding for middle mile has to prioritize making that middle mile network accessible and fairly priced for rural last mile providers to make sure that those investments benefit everybody in the state, not just the holder.
I see. Okay. And so does that also mean that in instances where a service provider might want to provide service in an area and that DOT is building, that there'll be an opportunity to do joint trench and literally save or reduce or make this a more efficient build?
Well,
Or
DOT is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut off the end of your question.
no, that's fine. Go ahead.
DOT has already created and issued a dig once policy for that exact purpose, making sure that where, and not just for their 95 and US 70 work, but anywhere there is a major road project going on, that providers know about the opening of the ground, right, and
Right.
the availability of trenches for additional deployment. So they've got that standalone policy available statewide. Additionally, they'll be creating opportunities with these I-95 and US 70 funds, which were tied originally to a US DOT infra grant. And so I think DOT is one of the entities that will, I think, have opportunities under this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding for additional similar projects likely.
Thanks, Nate.
Of course. And I'm happy, let me just say real quick, I'm glad to take any other questions in this setting, but if anyone wants to talk offline, I can make my information available to board members for subsequent conversations.
Do we have any other questions for Nate? Okay, not hearing any, then we'll go ahead and move on to the, thank you, Nate.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to other business. So before we do that, Rocco, my esteemed vice chair, are there any comments or things that you may want to add before we move on to other business?
Jim, this morning, obviously all the presentations are great. I feel like I'm sort of drinking from, and I've been participating or following most of these, and yet still feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose as I'm hearing everything we got going on, and just looks like some great progress on all fronts.
Yeah. Yes, our teams are doing miraculous work. Like I said in my opening comments, I can't recall a time in public sector history where we had more money, and now it's a people problem, right? We had the supply shortage, not only from a technology aspect, but from a people aspect as well. And it's not just us; even in the private sector, they're seeing these same issues as well. So it's interesting. Okay, as far as other business, do any committee members want to bring forward any other business? Okay, I'm going to take advantage then of silence and say no other new business. So then we'll just go ahead and move to adjournment. I know this was a long conversation today, so thank you very much. Just a reminder, our next meeting is going to be scheduled for March 18th. So if those invites are not out already, they will be forthcoming. And of course, there you go. They got the last meeting. Oh, and my general counsel has reminded me that I need to do a motion for adjournment. So can I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Okay, second?
Second.
Okay. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay.
Aye.
Happy holidays, everybody, and we'll see you in the new year. And again, to our committees, thank you for all the great work that you guys have been doing. It's greatly appreciated. Have a great holiday period. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.